This week on Thinking Biblically, we're going to be looking at a biblical perspective on the environment. And I was kind of surprised about where some of the discussion went, and maybe you will be too. Welcome back to Thinking Biblically. I'm Alan Gilman, and Thinking Biblically is a podcast dedicated to examining how all of Scripture speaks to all of life. And before I introduce this week's guest, I want to remind everyone to subscribe and to share and comment. And I'll give you my email address that you can send me any questions or comments you might have that way. I look forward to engaging with you. Also, feel free if you have any suggestions as to topics or guests. I'd be very happy to hear that from you. So this week, it is my pleasure to introduce to you Rick Faw. Rick Faw is Vice President of Programming with Rocha Canada. Erosia is an international Christian organization which, inspired by God's love, engages in scientific research, environmental education, community-based conservation projects, and sustainable agriculture. Rick has been a lead educator with Rocha Canada since 2004. He became VP of Programming in 2014. Rick combines academic backgrounds in science and theology with a love for the outdoors. He has a Bachelor of Science from Trinity Western University in Langley, British Columbia, and a Master's in Christian Studies from Regent College, Vancouver. His desires for people to integrate their spiritual life with their experience of the created world. Rick, his wife Krista, and their teenagers Jared and Zoe live and play alongside 6 other households at Kingfisher Farm in Surrey, BC, which is part of the Greater Vancouver area, where you can just about see the United States from your house, right, Rick?
It's true. Yeah, we're half a kilometer from the US, something like that.
Yeah, so as many people know, my family and I, we lived in what's called the Lower Mainland. That's the secret term for Metro Vancouver. So we lived in the Lower Mainland 16 years, 2 different stints. 6 of our 10 kids were born there. And, everywhere you live has interesting things, like the fact that Surrey has a 0 avenue.
Mm-hmm. It does. And there's a part right near where my house is where there's literally a ditch, like 0 avenue, a ditch, and then the US.
Do you think I can get in trouble? Do you think I can get in trouble for saying on the air that years ago I did a walk at Peace Arch Park, and Peace Arch Park is this beautiful place. We used to have picnics there. It's right on the U.S. border. In fact, part of the park is on the U.S. side. The other part's on the Canadian side. There's this wonderful arch that has inscribed Psalm 133, verse 1. Behold how good and pleasant it is when brothers dwell together in unity. And I was there once by myself, and I was walking around, and I saw, and I stepped onto the sidewalk on the U.S. side, not realizing that I probably was creating some sort of international crisis, because you're really not allowed to do that. But there's no guards, there's no police. It's just, maybe I shouldn't be telling people this, but, and I don't, is Peace Arch Park still like that now?
It is. It's been, during the pandemic, the Canadian U.S. Officials have treated it quite differently. So the Canadian side was shut down for much of the pandemic, but the American side was still open. And because of a quirk of international law, you can enter the park from I'm from the Canadian side, and the Americans can enter the park from the American side, and you can meet people.
Right.
As long as neither of you, like you say, step onto the other sidewalk.
Yeah, so that's quite an anomaly. Is that the right word?
Very much
Canadian territory and American territorial.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, it is really something. So you can visit.
There have been dozens of families who are separated by the border during the pandemic that have met there.
That is wonderful. Dozens. I think we're going to see an increase as a result of this podcast.
There you go.
Yeah. So why don't we start? Can you explain in more detail what Erosia is and what it does?
Yeah, well, I'll start with the name. So Erosia means the rock in Portuguese. And we have this Portuguese name because Erosia started in Portugal. So it started because a British couple, Peter and Miranda Harris, Peter was an Anglican curate who was passionate, like ridiculously head over heels for birds. And southern Portugal is a major migratory flyway for birds going to and from Africa and Europe. So they founded a bird observatory in the early 80s on the southern tip of Portugal at this estuary where all these migratory birds go. And the thing was, they did that as Christian mission. Like they were sent there as missionaries to start a bird observatory. So at the time,
So
early 80s,
they're reaching out to birds. I'll try not to
well,
I know I'm being kind of silly.
that is, I'm sure, the
That's
way
what it
many
sounds
people
like.
at the time and maybe even today still think of it. But they thought of it as this is one component of what it means to follow Christ, is to care for creation. And so they did that in southern Portugal for roughly 10 years, and then they handed it off to Portuguese leadership, and they ran it kind of as like this a home. Like they had 4 kids that was open to the visitors. So if you went and joined them, it was, I've heard people say it was sort of a mashup between like Labrie and a conservation field studies center and like a hostel or something like that. So like
For those
lots
who
of
don't know
people
about
mixing in.
Labrie, it was originally founded as a place for university type students, intellectual types to find God.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
talk about faith, talk about why we do what we do. So they had all types go through there. And eventually they discovered, hey, some of those folks that went through said, we love what you're doing. Can we do it where we are, like back in my home country? And this sparked projects around the world. And so fast forward to today, and there's about 20 countries around the world that have some sort of a Rocha project. And I work for the Canadian one. In Canada, we have projects spread across the country, and our focus is, and Erosia everywhere, the focus is centrally caring for creatures, particularly endangered species, and then caring for the habitats that they depend upon. So habitat restoration and species monitoring is kind of, I've often described as sort of like the core work. But then around that core, we do environmental education, whether that's with kids, like school kids, or whether that's like conferences for adults or preaching in churches. Basically, it's education to try to link for people birds, bugs, plants, air, water, soil. These things actually matter to everyone because the health of these things is directly linked to our health. And they matter in particularly to Christ. And therefore, we believe they should matter to people who follow Christ. So that's kind of the education bit. Then a few projects also have layered on this sustainable agriculture component. And this is meant to be a link. So like my mother, for instance, God bless her, I love her dearly. She couldn't care a whit for, Salish suckers, one of the species we study nearby here. It's just this tiny little fish.
Salish
She doesn't,
suckers?
Salish sucker, like a
Say
tiny
that three
little
times fast.
ignoble fish, right? She doesn't care about those, but she loves her flowers. She's into that. So the point is, not everybody's into conservation. Not everybody has a passion for birds or for whatever other wildlife, snails or frogs, but everybody eats. And the single biggest impact, human impact, on the planet's biosphere, like the life support structures of the planet, is food. So the growing, the distribution, dealing with the waste, all of the aspects that are associated with food, that's our biggest impact. So the extent to which we can model agriculture in a way that is regenerative, that builds biodiversity rather than compromise it, that's actually conservation work. So and it's also this bridge. It's this way to get people in. Everybody eats. So everybody in that sense can do conservation. So those are the 3 primary ways that we go about our work. And then, but all of that is embedded in a kind of ethic and practice of hosting. So whether you come for an hour or whether you come for 9 months or you come on staff and you come and live, there's this dynamic of inviting people in to join in that work, kind of wherever they're coming from, and they get to help in all 3 of those kind of primary program areas.
So you
there's
also
a
have
little bit about Rocha.
right. So you have a community. The community aspect to what you do.
Yeah, definitely. Sometimes that's a lived community, and sometimes that's like just being very intentional about the neighborhood and the watershed in which we work.
So we started off with birds.
Mhm.
And are you saying so bird Am I right to call it bird conservation?
Yeah,
And then that's
that would be one
connected.
slice of conservation. Like you could also have conservation that's to deal with frogs or with mammals or with invertebrates or all
So
other creatures.
yeah, I don't know if I heard anyone talk about environmental concerns very specifically this way about a direct connection to food. Now that
Mm.
original couple, which I'm sorry I didn't.
Peter and Miranda Harris.
Okay, so Peter and Miranda, when there's a couple things I want to explore. So
Hmm.
let's go back to them and they were, you said they were missionaries in Portugal. They
Mm.
loved birds. They started this. Now, is there a bit of bait and switch going on? Like, so you open up
Mm.
this bird sanctuary so you can
Hmm.
somehow talk spiritual things with people, and
Right.
it's really not about the birds, which then it means it's not really about the food. And can you
Right.
unpack that a little bit?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that is a common question. People have asked that of Arasha, certainly of Peter Miranda originally, but they've asked that of Arasha repeatedly. And the response is no, it's not a means to an end. It's an end. So our understanding would be is that as followers of Christ, we need to care about what Christ cares about. We believe Christ is the center. Christ created. Colossians 1. He is the creator, sustainer, and restorer of all things, everything, tapanta. So that suggests, among many other parts of theology and scripture, God cares about what he made. So we should too. So we see this as simply a part of living out the Christian life. And that I'm not saying that every Christian should be a frog expert, but as I understand it, I do think every Christian has a role to play in caring for creation in some form, in a
Yeah,
similar
but
way
Rick,
that not every Christian is called to preach,
sure.
but every Christian is called to, in some way, support the spread of Christ's name.
But
So,
if God's got the whole world in his hands, why should I care about Salish suckers? It doesn't, isn't that God say, I got that? You take care of the
mm.
spiritual stuff. I'll take care of all the birds and the bees and the flowers and the trees.
Well, I mean, one way to respond to that is similar to, well, God says, I've got all other people in my hands. So I don't need to bother with those either. It's just about me and my own. Like all I have to do is worry about my relationship with God, and that's it. And then whatever happens to all
Well,
the people around me, whether that's my wife or my neighbor or people across the world, well, God's got it. God's got it.
and
I
there
don't
might
have
be
to do
some
anything
people
with
that
that.
actually think that. So
Well,
okay, so
I
okay,
don't.
okay, and I accept that. But are you saying therefore that just like we're responsible for other people, we're responsible for? I keep wanting to come back to the sailor suckers. That's a little bit your fault, but
That's fine. I don't mind.
I'm sure you got some other interesting creatures that you can share with us as well. That we
Red-legged frogs, the western toads. We could
yeah, but
go down the
sailor
list.
suckers anyway.
Yeah, it's a good one.
So does our God-given responsibility from a biblical perspective, and I'm putting you on the spot here, can you make a biblical case apart from simply saying, we need to care? Is there a biblical basis for caring for the small and large creatures and these areas of the planet?
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I think there's a number of ways to sort of go at that. Um, I mean, I think the start is the first one of the first commandments in Genesis that are given to humans is to till and to keep the garden. Genesis 2:15. And I don't think that has ever been rescinded. No matter whatever else is happening in the biblical story, that still stands. And noteworthy, that is prior to rebellion against God. So I think there is a biblical case to be made that will probably continue in the new heavens, new earth. We will still be tilling and keeping. It seems to me that the garden was meant to be this sort of like starting point. how can we allow this? How can we be a part of allowing this to flourish? Um, insofar as insofar as God is kind of creator of all, like he definitely is, it seems to me this is yet another way in which he invites us to join him. God invites us to join in the work of the Spirit in bringing life everywhere, in life into you and to me, and to my family, my friends, but also life in creation. I think the Spirit is at the root of all of that, and caring for creation is just a way that God invites us to join in that. So, yes, we have a responsibility. That's one way to describe it. I also think it's just as much an opportunity. This is a chance for us to join in what God is already doing. So, how do we go about doing that, for instance? Well, it seems to me we're made in God's image. Humans are created in God's image. So we are supposed to image God. Well, what does God do? Well, God, the creatures under his care, he loved so much that he wanted the best for them so much that he really wouldn't stop at anything to make that happen. Like he went right to Christ coming, incarnating, not just incarnating, but dying, suffering for our sake. And I think we're supposed to follow that model. Okay, so what is the sphere, the realm, that God has delegated to our purview? Well, that's Earth, at least. You could argue creation, although we haven't made it to too many other planets yet, but at least Earth. And how are we supposed to engage that? Well, I think we should engage it. We should follow Christ. How did Christ do that? Well, what does Philippians 2 say? Like, considered equality with God not something to be grasped, but made himself a servant, even unto death, for the sake of the people under his care. Well, I think we're doing something similar. I go to John 3:16, like, for God so loved the world that he gave his only son, that he died for us. Well, the word there, world, in Greek is cosmos. It's not just people. It includes people, but it's cosmos. God so loved the world that he sent his son. God so loved the cosmos that he sent
Yeah,
his son.
I refer to that as the created order.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there you go. So if God and Christ care about it that much, then I think that's what we're called to do as well.
Yeah, I
So it
wonder.
depends on how thorough, but there's a
Yeah,
kind of
yeah,
snapshot.
yeah. That's helpful. I wonder if one of the problems we face among many believers today, with regard to environmental concern for the creation, is life has moved to the cities, and most of us are spending more time on things like Zoom and YouTube to do podcasts like this and all the ways we engage technology. We're so far removed from the earth, when in fact, unless somebody is planting seed and tending those plants and doing all the agricultural stuff, we all die, plain and simple. And most of the history of the world, human beings were close to the land. That's how life worked. And it's only in more recent history, relatively, that many of us, and in some parts of the world, most of us, are disconnected from the land. It sounds like if we go back a century, or maybe even not that much, we would hardly even have to have this conversation, because people knew that we needed to give priority to the land, or else we die. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I sometimes two things I want to say about this. One, sometimes when I've had people, in not so many words, say, "Well, I'm glad that you care about all these wild things, but it's not really my deal." I don't know if I've ever been quite so bold and snarky, but in my head, I want to respond to them. Okay, fair enough. Well, but which part is not your part? The food part? You can do without that. The air part? I don't need that part. The water part? I don't need that part. Like the shelter part. Which part don't you need? Like, I think it's totally true that throughout history and in other parts of the world, even presently, there are many people, I'd argue most, are far more aware of the fact that all of our lives, including urbanites, resolutely depend upon the life support structures of the planet. We cannot do without them. We will die without them. Most people recognize that because they get their shelter, they get their water, they get their food, they get their medicine, they get their fuel. They get all of these things directly, daily from creation. We go to, I go to the supermarket to get my food. Actually, I do grow some food, but often I go to the supermarket to get some food. So I am. You're right that this connection is there. The second thing I want to say is, insofar as this is true, human life, even though we often forget it or maybe are insulated from the fact, some of us are insulated from the fact that our lives fundamentally depend upon creation. Even though that's the case, even though we forget it, if it is true that people's lives are fundamentally dependent on creation, then caring for creation is a way that I serve and love them. If my actions undercut, compromise, degrade the life support structures that other people depend on, how is that loving? I don't think it is. I think so in this regard, I think caring for creation, I've heard like loving God, worshiping God, loving people, and caring for creation is like a three-legged stool. You really can't have any one without the other two. They all go together. And this is backed up biblically time and time again.
So for many of us, we just take I'm calling it the land, but it's the land, the air, the water for granted. And I guess many of us are just plain spoiled. And then when we hear people like yourselves or other people talk about environmental concern and so on, for some of us, it sounds like noise. Now, and yet, I don't know how many people who are really hot on the topic of the environment kind of get that we're actually talking about food and what it amounts to daily survival and care of fellow human beings. But I don't know how much I want to park there. One of the things I want to mention is, most Bible believers that I know, and the majority are non-Jewish Christians, are very, very New Testament focused. And one of the things that I do in my Bible teaching is as well as with this podcast, is try to reestablish a holistic biblical understanding. And I make the claim, which I think is biblically well-founded, that you cannot understand the New Testament apart from the Old Testament, and vice versa. But the New Testament is actually built on the foundation of the Hebrew Scriptures. But when you think of the New Testament in isolation, and maybe you know of some passages, can you think of New Testament passages that apart from John 3:16, which most people would not understand? Most people think John 3:16 is a statement about God's love for you and me as individuals, not for the created order, which I believe is more correct, that Jesus actually died for creation. And we can be part of his creation restoration plan by believing in him. And if we believe in him, we'll not perish, but have the life of the age to come, which is really I think the best way to understand John 3:16. But do you know of any passages in the New Testament that draw us to the issue of creation care? I want to come to the Hebrew Scriptures, but just focusing for a moment on the New Testament by itself.
Well, I've already mentioned one. Colossians 1 is the preeminent one. So in Colossians 1, the first 20 verses or so, particularly 15 to 20, is this, some scholars would say it's a hymn, actually. And it extols how Christ is the center of, and then it lists, Christ is the center of creation. Like all that exists is due to him. Christ is at the center of sustaining what is. Everything exists and continues to exist because of Christ. And Christ is at the center of the redemption of all things through his work on the cross. So there you've got this affirmation. I'm not sure how much stronger to put it, that Christ cares about everything he's made. I think another thing that I would point to is simply the incarnation. Some folks have noted the fact that divine creator, that the creator would take on createdness, has got to be like the biggest stamp of approval for matter that you could possibly think of.
Yeah, I
Like,
agree.
what would be
Matter matters.
matter matters? Like, how else could you conceive? Like, how else? What else can I interpret from that? And especially given that things like Paul's exhortation in Colossians and John's description in John 3, these sorts of things, they point to, this is an abiding, constant concern for the creator. God cares about this. So, I mean, I could point to other little bits. I think it's Mark's gospel that ends with, go and preach the gospel to all creation. That's an interesting one. Like, what does that mean then? What would it look like to preach the gospel to all creation? I've got some ideas on that. I think another key part, particularly New Testament, is our understanding of the age to come, the new heavens, new earth. The picture given in Revelation is that the realm of God comes down to the realm of people, comes down to earth. And this, I mean, I don't think we're given enough data to know how that works or what that looks like exactly. But what is clear is that it's not a rejection of, it's a fusing with. Creation, the prophets describe, heaven is my throne and earth is my footstool. It's from Isaiah. The picture of the age to come is that all of creation becomes the place where God dwells, similar to the Garden of Eden, similar to the Holy of Holies, similar to the Spirit in us, similar to the life of the Spirit in the gathered church, the embodied church. Like, these are all threads where, similar to the incarnation. What is Peterson's translation? He moved into the neighborhood. This is referring to John 1. So, like, all of these kind of trajectories point to God's plan, God's overarching purpose has creation as a part of it.
Yeah, and this is the sort of thing that I think a lot of us miss, that God really cares about the whole creation. It's not, Jesus didn't just die for souls, disembodied, whatever those are supposed to be, that God initiated a creation project at the beginning. He loved that creation project. He had an opportunity to completely obliterate it in Noah's day, but he didn't. He rebooted it instead. I like using that term. And that shows his commitment to it. And it's not just the people, it's the animals, and of course then there's the land. And so I think you described it well, talking about in Colossians, what are the cosmic effects of what Jesus really did? Is it just for the people? Is it just for the souls? It seems it's far more than that. And that makes a case for the value of creation, which right at the beginning, Genesis 1, we were given the responsibility through our first parents to subdue the land. That was the very first thing. And as you said, he's never rescinded that mandate. And talking as a Canadian about mandates today, people will come on different sides of it. But there are heavenly established mandates that God has put in place that he's never taken back. And much of what it means to help people truly walk with God is to help people understand all that he has called us to do. And it's not simply a set of spiritual things that are disconnected from the rest of life. So speaking of that, I want to come back to how you've connected environmental concern with food, which, as I said, maybe I haven't been paying attention, but I haven't heard it put so simple as that. That's simply. Can you talk about that a little more about how like so we lived in BC. We've been to those marine areas where you're not allowed to take away a rock. You're not allowed to pick those little nice little leafy plants or those little wildflowers. You have to leave them because it's a protected area. And in fact, when I was a kid, like who cared about any of that stuff? Just
Mhm.
you I think you're still allowed to blow the dandelion seeds. Maybe there's areas where you're not allowed to do that anymore. I don't know, but for some of us, it seems kind of strange. Don't take away the rocks. Can you explain why that kind of conservation? How is that connected to food?
Mm. Well, I mean, some of this is rooted in ecology. So when humans grow food, they most typically transform the landscape. And in a particular style of agriculture, it involves moving towards mostly monocrops. This can be particularly fruitful. You can get a
You're going to have to
lot of
explain. I
food
think I know
for.
what you mean by monocrops, but
It's like
I've never used
where
that word before.
on a particular patch of land, there's only one crop that's growing that we harvest.
Right. So
So
it's like for
think of
kilometers or
a
miles, it's corn. It's all corn.
yeah, exactly. That
Yeah.
would be one example.
Canola.
Whereas what existed there before human agriculture would be a really complex ecosystem with dozens and dozens and dozens, if not hundreds, maybe even thousands of not just creatures, but different types of creatures all growing there. So that kind of uh, immense biodiversity. There's just one example. The same is true in a whole bunch of other types of ecosystems. The trend line is to optimize yield, we diminish biodiversity. And from ecologically speaking, biodiversity is life. So the an example here would be, say, in our efforts to increase yield, we use forms of pesticides that compromise bees. Well, you could say, what are bees going to do? Well, they do a whole bunch of things in an ecosystem, but one of the things that they do that we really care about is they pollinate. And they pollinate, like, I think it's about a third of all human food. And because of what we're doing, bees are collapsing. Okay, so caring for bees is part of caring for food, and vice versa. The way we grow food has an awful lot to do with this particular insect. And of course, I mean, just to use this example, bees are one little creature within a whole ecosystem of creatures. So what you do with the bees is going to affect birds. It's going to affect the soil. It's going to affect, that's the way ecosystems work. So you could do a similar thought experiment with water. So almost all agriculture involves water. And usually, at least where I am here, it has meant draining what was formerly thought of as a useless swamp so that it can become fertile cropland. Well, yeah, it is fertile, but the swamp wasn't useless. It has ecological significance in the services it performs, not least biodiversity. The most biodiverse places on Earth are wetlands. So you get the most, and one of the reasons biodiversity is so important is for resilience. As soon as you thin out, as soon as you start taking like pages out of the encyclopedia of creation, like I'm going to mix metaphors here. It's like a Jenga tower. You see the Jenga tower, and you start pulling out bits. Well, I don't really need that one. I don't really need that one. I don't really need that one. But at some point, you're going to come to one that you need, and we don't know in advance exactly which one that is. So biodiversity is the kind of rock bottom foundation of sustaining life on this planet. Without it, no life exists.
So one of the things this makes me think of is So God commanded human beings to subdue the earth. And in order to properly take care of this planet, I believe, and I think you would agree, that we weren't just supposed to live off the berries and just kind of migrate around and pick the berries. That the idea of clearing land and creating agricultural developments, that would be a good thing. Domesticating animals. And am I right? That in itself is not where the problem lies. Is that correct? Or do you
Yeah,
believe that we should actually just kind of go back to this kind of like just live off the berries? Then
yeah. I think there's
we'd have
one.
to leave Canada.
Sure. I think there's one line of thought that would say, and there are other religions that would believe this, like humans are the problem, and the more we can minimize what humans do, the better. And the end point of that kind of philosophy is, well, I just stop eating and then die, and that's the best thing I can do. I don't think that's the biblical perspective. I think the language of ecological footprint or carbon footprint is often is become much more common in our parlance these days. So you'll understand this as a metaphor. It's like, how big is my impact ecologically? It's a way to try to measure that or picture that. The problem I have is it's only negative. Like, as in, what is my negative impact? I think scripturally, biblically, humans are called to have an impact. It's just an impact of flourishing. Where we go, where we live is supposed to be, we should see this kind of ripple of life springing up everywhere. So a good example of this, really tangible example of this, look up like Ethiopian forest churches or something like that. Google that. And you'll get these pictures of this Ethiopian landscape that is barren, except for these little pockets of dense, lush forest that are all centered around churches. And it's the way that these churches have maintained what other practices have lost. And to me, that's more like what we're shooting for. When the language of subdue, I want to say, has to be paired with the language of tilling and keeping and the model of Christ. Christ's form, Christ's method of subduing was self-sacrifice for the health and flourishing of the other. Okay, if that's the type of subduing we're talking about, I'm all in, because that's going to mean that we're talking metaphorically and maybe even literally more about, you mentioned picking fruit. We have a bunch of fruit trees on my property here. The only fruit trees that thrive are the ones that are pruned intelligently. When they are pruned intelligently, bumper crop. When they are either neglected or pruned like ignorantly, then they really suffer. All right, so take that as a practical example. Like, what it would look like for us to engage with creation and meet human needs, but in a way that allows for the thriving and flourishing of all creatures. That's what we're called to do. That is what it would mean to, as I understand it, biblically, rule and subdue, to till and to keep, to follow Christ in a way that is, and then the metaphor becomes not a footprint that is like we're trying to minimize. No, we're trying to maximize. We're trying to optimize our impact. We're trying to have a bigger impact, because where followers of Christ go, there is life abundant, and not just life for people, but life. And I say that as a meaning we need to life for other creatures, but those are connected. Remember, like the flourishing of creatures is the foundation for the flourishing of people. And
Yeah, I really like it's not the it's a pruning metaphor only when it doesn't apply literally to fruit trees, but that idea that the call to subdue is a call to prune. It's to engage the creation in such a way to bring about, as you said, flourishing. So it's not a call to exploit for maximum profits. And some other time with some other person we could talk about economic systems and these sorts of issues. But when you brought up monocrops and figured out what that meant, the only reason why we could have these large swaths of land that have nothing but corn or nothing about canola is because we're actually part of this bigger kind of global agricultural thing where this farmer produces nothing but this one thing that he then sells to, and you would know more than me on this, to the international market. And then we're getting some of our basic things from who knows how many thousands of kilometers away. And it's this huge system that's very difficult for the average person to even perceive what's going on. And I have the impression that the motive isn't human flourishing. The motive is profit. And again, there's nothing wrong with making a profit in and of itself. But if you're making a profit and destroying that which God has ordained to provide nutrition to humans, it's a very, very narrow view. It's all about the profit. It's not about. Am I making sense here?
Yeah, I would be a little more pointed even. I think it's not just profit that's at the root of it, actually. I don't think. I think it's my desire for whatever I want. I want whatever I want, and I want it now. So where I'm going at here is, so like I have family members who are farmers, and I know a bunch of large scale farmers. So I'm not sure if we'll get to that. There's a couple of qualifications I would want to say. This conversation is focused on farming a little more than I anticipated, but there are ways I'm happy to go there, but I don't know if we want to go there. What I will say is that driving most food production, particularly where I live in kind of a Western kind of society, is the demand for any type of food at any time of the year in any place. So I expect that I can go somewhere nearby and any day, 365 days a year, and get cherries or strawberries fresh or whatever it is. So when it comes to like, I don't have a lot of advice to give to farmers. I think they need to that's not my skill set. They need to figure that out. What I do have a lot of advice for though is eaters. And I'm one of them. And I think one of the ways in which people can care for creation through their food, I have lots of advice on this, but one would be just eat more seasonally. Get in tune with what is ripe where you are at this time of the year. And at least shift, inch. I try to inch my diet in that direction. It doesn't mean that I don't buy anything out of season, but okay, can I inch my diet in that direction? This is an example of what it would mean to both be, it illustrates both my complicity, but also my agency in food systems and how that then can impact larger conservation concerns. I kind of lost the thread there.
Yeah, but without realizing it, you've gotten very personal because for the longest time, we have a routine at our home. Is part of our breakfast is fruit bowls. Fresh, never frozen. Never our own, all bought from the store. And so I had strawberries and blueberries this morning, and I expect that I will have them again tomorrow. Now, if I need to give up my blueberries and strawberries in the middle of winter, and I remember it wasn't that long ago where it used to be they're not in season, you don't get them, and something changed. I don't know when it was that all these things are regularly available, and often at decent prices too. which is
Yeah,
because I remember the other thing. Oh yeah, you
that's
can
part
get
of the
these
problem.
strawberries. There's a little tiny box, and it was exorbitant. But now you go to that place where you have
Yeah.
to pay money just to be able to go inside this very big warehouse where where you're accosted by the 80-inch TVs that'll remain nameless, and you get these 2 pound packages of huge, wonderful strawberries at decent prices. Now, if if our changing our diet is going to make a difference, for argument's sake, let's say I'd be willing to do it. But here's a big question. So you don't eat blueberries in February where you are.
I
Uh,
do.
oh,
You can follow up with that. I had some this morning.
well, are they your own that you froze, or did you go to that same place?
They're from a farmer down the street that I froze.
Okay, so you froze. Okay, and we lived in that area, and a lot of people, you pick blueberries and strawberries and raspberries and
Mm,
in that part of Vancouver is wonderful. But that,
yeah.
never mind that. So I don't know where ours were from, but they were not local. So let's say, for argument's sake, I'd be willing to help the worldwide community in ensuring that we have a better future for the access of food. But what difference does it make whether or not tomorrow my wife goes to that same store or that other store that she goes to and buys the blueberries and strawberries? Like, you made it sound very noble and as if it's going to make a difference, but what difference does it make?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of things I would want to say to that. One, I think the part of the part of the advantages of our current system, the way like a food system, and that's tied up with our economic systems, is that it encourages a depersonalization. I'm encouraged to ignore and be oblivious to the people and places behind everything. We're talking about food, but it could be like my phone or my glasses or this water bottle or the pen or whatever, everything. We're encouraged to be oblivious to it. This whole thing is set up to ignore those relationships, but those relationships exist. Okay, how am I contributing to the flourishing or the degradation of those relationships? I think that's one way to start to frame. Oh, wait a minute. So then when it gets back to, okay, do I go down to the grocery store down the street and buy the strawberries from Mexico or whatever? It could be, well, there are farmers in Mexico that are benefiting from this. Great. How much are they benefiting? Oh, wait a minute. These strawberries are dirt cheap. Huh. They're probably not benefiting that much. A little bit of investigation into that are probably going to get you into uh, some discovery of the way that supply chain has some inequities in it. What could
But
I do
Rick,
that would be different about that?
we've got a
Let, let
huge.
me
Yeah, go
let me
ahead.
let me
Yeah,
let me go on. Another part would be, well, what about the local farmers? What could I do? So, like, making shifts, even small shifts, away from the faceless, nameless, can cultivate relationships with people who are in my neighborhood. What would it look like to support them and to be willing to maybe pay a little bit more because they're here? I know, I start to trust. I get to know and I start to trust this farmer actually cares about the river that runs through their property, and they're taking measures to um, encourage the biodiversity and the flourishing of the creatures in that river. Now, that's costly to him or her. What can I do to support that? That's something I care about. Well, I can buy food from them instead of from someplace I don't know.
but I could
So,
do that. But I could do that in July and August. It's not going to make a
yeah,
difference. Now I know maybe I could buy
right.
lots and freeze
So
it,
you can't do it. Yeah, yeah, fair enough.
but still. And also the thing is though, so what you did your little bit there with your water bottle and your glasses
Yeah.
and all the
Mm-hmm.
rest. That so I could have a discussion with my wife. We're going to stop our fruit
Yeah.
bowls for a little while.
Where does it
But
end?
yeah, but the thing
Where
is
does it end?
that water bottle, those glasses, and those cool headphones with the fancy mic that you have
Yeah.
around your neck
Yeah.
there. Again, if I want to make a difference, I know in one sense every little bit helps, but when it becomes so minuscule, what difference is it really making? And this is and one of the things I've been going through in all honesty over the past few weeks is I want to look more at the whole big thing because I think there's something going on with the way we consume, with the way the commercialization of everything, the way businesses are set up today, and I don't know what the response is. I we had our own little chat about a couple of weeks ago. You described where you live and with the other people on the property, and you're doing an alternative way of living on the land that could maybe that's the model for more of us to move towards something that is more sustainable and more loving towards the planet, is more like pruning than exploitation. But it seems to me that if we don't do something on a bigger scale, we're not going to make that much of a difference, which would lead us, and we're really at the end of our time. So maybe you're going to have to come back because there are people that are saying, well, there are these big things to do. And so
Yeah.
now everybody's got to get electric cars, and everybody needs to celebrate Earth Day and turn off the lights for an hour. And that's going to make all the difference. We need these large scale international dictates, and that's going to fix everything. I have my doubts. Uh, I think it's going to happen far more along the personal line that maybe, can you, because we don't have a lot of time, can we maybe end with what you're actually doing and some of the things that, could you do that?
I'm not sure what you're referring. I'm actually doing.
Where you're living and
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, you're teasing me here, Alan. Like I want to respond to so many different parts
I'm
there.
sorry.
Come
So you're gonna have to come back.
But okay, so there's a couple of things here. One, at least briefly, you're gonna have to let me say, I definitely think that there are large scale structural changes that are required in order to be commensurate, to meet the scale of the problems. I'm not that is true. I agree with that. Where I'm a little skeptical is that we collectively, whatever that we is, my household, my town, my church, my province, my country, our globe, whatever the we is, I'm a little skeptical that we are going to be able to make the choices that are needed in the big things if we're not willing to do it on the little things. So I think that's a dynamic. Second, I care a lot about being effective. What is the biggest bang for buck impact? Absolutely. I think it's a problem when that becomes the only rubric. And it's a problem for Christ followers because the question of well, why bother? It's not going to make a difference could also be said of a whole bunch of other things that are involved with following Christ. Prayer, attending church on Sunday morning. What good does preaching do? Don't get me started. The list is long. Why bother is a question that goes for a whole bunch of things. I just think it's a misplaced question if, and this is my contention, if I believe that God's picture of the world is the truly realistic one. It's when I'm tempted to say, no, God's picture isn't the realistic one. This isn't God's project. This is my project. I'm the one who has to save. That's when I can fall into the temptation of, look, it's all about the highest impact, the best bang for buck kind of thing. That's the only thing that matters. That's when I'm tempted. When I want to save the world, that's where I can go. But the world has a savior and it's not me. So there, I'd say that. There's so much more. So what I think then is one of the most crucial things is that I think the deceiver has captured our imaginations as much as anything else. So what does it mean to live? What is the good life all about? What does that look like? I thought it was having the freedom to go on vacations and watch Netflix and eat whatever I want at any time of the year, and whatever. Like that's what I thought it was. Whatever, the big house and all that kind of stuff. Like, and that's what our society tells us constantly. And I want to challenge that. I want to say I don't think that really is what it's about. So as part of challenging that, our household is a part of a 10-acre farm that includes 6 other households. We co-own this place. We live here. Some of us are growing food. All of us are trying to increase the biodiversity on the property. All of us are trying to engage with the local community that lives literally across the street and comes to our farm market. Most of us have like off-property jobs. Like it's not, but we are trying to model an overlapped life that has in mind things like the flourishing of creatures, the ability to grow food in ways that is regenerative for biodiversity, that encourages hospitality and intentional relationship with all our neighbors, human and non-human. That I could list more. That we self-govern in a way that is based on consensus, for instance. So there's a variety of things that we're doing, and I would be really hesitant, and it would feel like, for me, a failure if people that encounter what we're doing go away and say, well, we just have to do that. No, don't do that. What I want and what I hope for is that through what we're doing, the Spirit can spark a new imagination in other people for what is possible wherever they are. It's not going to be like this. I could describe some of the idiosyncratic, unique aspects of what we're doing, and it's probably not going to, like, almost certainly it's not going to be the same for you or somebody else. It's going to look different, but that's what the Spirit does. The Spirit takes our individual gifts, our individual possibilities, takes into consideration our context, and will inspire, that's the word, inspire life. Okay, well, what does that look like? I would love for people to encounter Kingfisher Farm or Erosia. I think Erosia is doing this as well. And not try to cookie cutter, but rather ask the question, okay, Spirit, what do you have for me? Whether that's me in my life, me in my household, me in my neighborhood, me in my church, me in my watershed. Like, what does that look like for me? I think it'll be very different. And if we had more time, I could describe a whole bunch of stories about how it looks differently for different people. It's not a cookie cutter. But to me, that's the aroma of the Spirit. That tells me, like, when it is different, that's what the Spirit is doing. There is so much of a glory in the individuality of different people and places. And when people come to Christ, they don't become less of who they are. They become more of who they are. They become who they truly are meant to be in Christ. Well, I think this is an element of that, just maybe on a communal scale. The last thing I'll say, when I can do some of that in conjunction with other people, it also mitigates the sense of, like, I can't make a difference, because I can make a difference with other people and I can see it. I can document what's happened here and how it's different now.
Well, I wanted to
so
jump. That's
helps.
exactly where I wanted to jump in with what you just explained, and then you explained it. And I see, and I don't know if it's because I don't want to give up my blueberries, or what I'm seeing in what you're doing in your community, making a sufficient, reasonable difference that my not eating blueberries tomorrow is not going to make. Like, if I just do that myself, well, what's that about? And especially since I'm still going to be doing all the other ways of interacting with our society that is probably contributing to the problem. And the thing that you said about you're not expecting cookie cutter response to people visiting your farm, I agree with you. In a lot of things that we do, we often expect that we find some solution and we expect everybody to do the same thing, and other people expect they're just right.
No,
so I'm with you. But the thing is, the principles that you're living by, communal living, responsibility, and how you're taking responsibility for how you deal with the land, your neighbors, inviting the neighbors to interact with your community, and you could do a better list than me. You are challenging everybody around you and calling them to godly living,
Mhm.
which includes all the personal side and the environmental side, etc. Which of course, our stopping to eat fruit bowls tomorrow is really not going to do that at all, unless we start a stop eating fruit bowl movement or something, right? But you're actually living out genuine godliness in a particular way that God's called you to, that then challenges other people to question how we're living. And I
Yeah, and
think we need to see more of that.
I'd want the question to be, for those that are Christ followers, to be to the Spirit of
Absolutely.
God, what do you have for me to do? So, like, you ask the Spirit that, and he might say, forget about the fruit bowls. That's not, Alan, that's not what I'm on about.
Well, I'm pretty sure
Like,
that's what he
so,
says.
well, that's for you to kind of work out with the Spirit. Like, it's not me. Like, I would want to, and this is my experience when I have engaged other people that have challenged me on things. And it's like, no way, I'm never doing that. But it sort of plants this seed, and the Spirit works in me like that. And it's like, and maybe it doesn't manifest in my life. Well, certainly not immediately. It's rare that it's immediate, and it's rare that it's exactly the same. But the Spirit uses that example to then, when I'm open to the Spirit's work in my life, when I'm open to that question of like, okay, well, what do you have for me? What are you calling me to? How can I join your work in bringing life and health and flourishing? Well, in my experience, the Spirit responds. Now, the response will probably be different for you than it is for me, but I'm okay with that. In fact, I want that.
Yeah.
I can't do everything. Like, and I know I'm no way claiming that I or anybody I'm associated with is doing it perfectly. No way. Like, we're just trying to be as faithful as we can to respond to what the Spirit is calling us to do in this particular moment right now. And
Yeah. Yeah. And I
yeah,
think,
that, yeah.
yeah, and I think what's happened here in our time together is you've helped us to expand our understanding of what God has called us to be responsible for. And so, if we're going to begin to react to some of the things we're constantly hearing about climate change and carbon footprint and carbon taxes, some of those things, we need to be dealing with that through a grid of what is God really calling us to do, instead of just sloughing it off and just, that's mainstream media, that's the sort of thing. To take a look at, and I would like to have a further conversation. I don't know if some of the things that we're hearing or that we think we're hearing about some of the big solutions is necessarily the way to go. But we certainly need to go to where we need to go in order to fully serve God in the way that He's calling us to. And this the consumer culture, the convenience culture, the high yield exploitive culture has serious issues, and as believers who've been called to steward this planet, we need to take these issues seriously. And if the powers that be, wherever they are, if they're not coming up with the best solutions, then let's come up with better ones. But we need to come up with those solutions. The status quo is, I don't think, is the way it should be.
No, it's not.
So if people wanted to uh, get to know your organization better and want to be in touch with you, what's the best way to do that?
Well, the first and best way is to come and visit. So there's a few sites where you can come and visit. I realize that's not possible for many, if not most. So our website, erosia.ca, is a good place to get started. Or if you're curious about the international work, erosia.org would be the other one. So AROCHA.ca or .org.
And to get in touch with you, is that possible?
Yeah. If people want to contact me, you can do it through our website. That would be fine. But I think Alan's going to put my email in the description.
Yeah, I could do that.
That would be fine too.
Okay.
rick.faw@erosia.ca.
Very good. Well, thank you so much, Rick, for having this discussion. We didn't know exactly where it was going to go, but
Yeah.
We're going to talk when I sign off, but I've been really
Okay.
delighted with the territory that we covered. So let's
Well,
get pruning.
I'm glad. I hope it serves. I hope it serves you and your listeners.
Yeah. So again, if you want to know more about Rick and Erosia, the best way to do that is through the two websites, erosia.ca, erosia.org. That'll be in the description, as well as Rick's email address. You can contact him directly. And if you have any questions or suggestions for me, you can contact me through writing comments at thinkingbiblically.org. That's comments at thinkingbiblically.org. And so until next time, this is Alan Gilman with Thinking Biblically.